it's Alice, and today we're gonna talk about the books I read in January. I feel like I've started off the year really well with my reading. I've read 7 books, which for me is like really good. And I've read some longer books as well, which I'm really happy with. I do usually do that in January. And I've also enjoyed like all of the books that I've read. Even though not everything is like new favorites, I have liked everything. So overall, it's been a really good month. We should probably just get into the reviews though. My first read of 2025 was The Likeness by Tana French. This is a mystery novel, and it starts off when this detective is called to this crime scene where a girl has been murdered, and everyone is freaking out, in part because the murdered girl looks exactly like our detective. Like, exactly. They're like doppelgangers. And then they're also freaking out because this murdered person is using like an undercover name that our detective used undercover ages ago. So she's like using her undercover identity. And that's obviously very weird. And then when the case stalls, they decide to send in the detective as this girl to try to like lure out the killer. I'm so happy that I finally got around to reading this book. I've had it for quite some time, and it's one of those books that I just felt like I was gonna like, and I was right. Now, this is the second book in a series, but the series, like, the books don't follow the same characters. Like, the main character in this book is a side character in the first book, and I looked up the third book, and the third book is about a side character in this book. So even though I didn't remember a lot from the first book because it had been ages since I read it, it didn't really seem to matter. It gives a little bit of backstory to this, but like I felt like it was fine either way. Anyways, I do remember really liking the first book, but I would say that I probably like this one a little bit more. Maybe because it has a lot of elements to it that I usually like in stories. Our main character, she goes into this victim's life, and this victim is a student, and she also has this friend group. And I love academic settings, and I love like books about friend groups, so it just had a lot of elements to it that I can never get enough of. There's great tension throughout this book, which I really liked. I thought that was done really well, and I really liked reading about our characters. Our main character is very interesting to follow because for a large part of the book, she is pretending to be someone else, and she doesn't really know this person, so she has to try to figure it out. And seeing her being sort of dragged between these two personalities was really interesting. I also really liked reading about the friend group and like getting to know them, and there's a lot of interesting characters in there, and seeing their dynamics and figuring out like the friend group. I thought that was really interesting. The mystery kept me guessing throughout, but I think one of the reasons that this works so well for me is that there's also all of this other stuff with the characters going on that I think is really interesting. It's not just a mystery, it's also an exploration of friendship and identity, and I really liked that. It probably does slow the book down a little bit, but I didn't mind, and I'm actually surprised by how quickly I read this. One of the reasons that I had put it off for a while is that it's like 600 pages ish, and it just felt like such a chunky book, but it actually ended up being a relatively quick read. Like, there was just something compulsive about the way it was written, and I just couldn't stop reading it. I'm not entirely sure what to rate this though. It's somewhere between a 4 and a 5, and I think I'm just gonna have to let it simmer a little bit before I decide. But it was a great book to start the year with, and it was just really well crafted and engaging. And now I want to read the next book in the series. I'm pretty sure I know what character we're following in the next book, who is a side character in this, and I think that story is going to be very interesting. So yeah, this was the perfect book to start 2025 with. Secondly, I read The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo. This is a historical fiction fantasy book, and it follows this maid who works in a house for this family, and one day the family finds out that this girl has some magical abilities, and they demand that she use those abilities to up the family's social standing, and this eventually attracts like the attention of the nobility and some really powerful people, and all of them kind of want to use her for their own agendas. This was a book that I was both excited and apprehensive to read, because when this first came out, I was really excited because I really like this author. But then I started like seeing some reviews and they were very mixed, and that made me feel a little bit like, so I went into this with very middling expectations, and I actually think that served me quite well because I actually ended up really enjoying this. I think this had a lot of things going for it, at least things that I like in books. We have an interesting historical setting, which I felt like added a lot of atmosphere to this. We have magic, which is always cool, and we have characters that at least I thought were interesting to read about. I did read some reviews after finishing this that a lot of people don't like this book because they don't like the main character. I really liked that she was a little bit unlikable. I thought that sometimes I didn't quite agree with her decisions or the way that she thinks, but I think that that made it more interesting to read in a way. It is a little bit slow in the beginning, which I didn't really mind. Sometimes I don't mind like slow beginnings to books. I think it often works very well, but I can see with this overall that the pacing is maybe a little bit off sometimes and it could have been a little bit smoother. And actually, it's not often that I say this, but I almost wish that this had been a little bit longer, because there are things in this book that I wish that we had explored more. Maybe in particular the magic and how that really works. And then there are some plot points that I feel like we could have spent a little bit more time on. So it's not perfect, but I will say when I was reading this, I didn't really think of a lot of these things. I thought about a lot of this after I'd finished it. Like I was left with a lot of questions. But when I was reading it, I was just enjoying it a lot. I enjoyed reading about the characters. There is also a little bit of romance in here, which I thought was I don't know. I'm not the biggest romance reader, but I thought it was a nice part of the story. I do also just really like Leigh Bardugo's writing, so I enjoyed that as well. And yeah, I am really glad that I didn't actually read this the minute it came out, because I think if I had done that, I would have gone into this with really high expectations. I actually think going into this with not a lot of expectations helped me quite a lot in enjoying it. I don't know if that makes any sense, but you know, sometimes you go into books with really high expectations, it almost ruins the experience, but I feel like I read this at a good time. It was like on my TBR for last year, but that's okay. I feel like I read it at a good time, and for me, this is somewhere between like 3 and 4 stars, and I would say that I would recommend it if you like books like these. I think it was pretty good. After that, I picked up The Examiner by Janice Hallett, which is another mystery novel. It's an epistolary novel, so this entire book is written in like various forms of correspondence, and it tells the story of 6 university students who are attending this multimedia art program, and during the examination process of their final project, one of the examiners gets the feeling that something happened during this course and that one of the students might actually be dead. This is my third book by this author, and she writes all of her books, at least the ones that I've read, in the same kind of style, so I kind of already knew that I was gonna like it. I thought I would like this one in particular though, because it follows university students, and I really, like usually I really like that in books, and I ended up really enjoying this one. I'm not surprised I ended up enjoying it though, because I always enjoy her books. I think one of the reasons that these books really work for me is that there's something really addictive about the writing. Like you just can't stop reading these like emails and chats and all of it. It's just very interesting. And I think we get to know the characters in a really interesting way, because we are hearing from them directly, but we're not inside their heads in the same way that you sometimes are in other books. And I just think it's interesting that even though it's a different way of telling a story, you do really get to know the characters and you get to know their voices, and it's just very engaging. I think the characters in here are really interesting. They do have quite distinct voices, and it's very clear that a lot of them have some secrets, and we spend quite a lot of time establishing who they are and also their dynamics and trying to figure out what all of these people are hiding, which is very interesting. This really did end up taking some turns that I did not see coming though. Like, sometimes it got a little bit spooky, sometimes it got a little bit gruesome, sometimes it got a little bit over the top, especially towards the end, but I really liked it. I didn't see any of it coming, and it just made for a very engaging and exciting read. Sometimes it's a little weird, but I really liked it. It was just a real page turner for me, and I had a lot of fun reading this and like speculating and trying to put things together. I'm not great at putting things together myself, so I'm usually surprised by the end of these books, but I like the sort of process of it. I would say that this is a very solid 4 out of 5 star read for me, and yeah, I really liked it. I also, this doesn't have anything to do with the review, but I just want to mention it. I chuckled several times throughout this book because one of the characters in here, the way that this character is in like different chats and conversations is exactly the way that one of my colleagues like communicates at my work, and it was so similar that I just had to laugh because it was just really funny. And there is something about like, it really made me think because sometimes the way that people express themselves in chats and in writing isn't how they are in real life. And because of this character that is so similar to one of my colleagues, I really thought about that. Like, I wonder what these characters are actually like outside of all of this correspondence. But yeah, it wasn't meant to be funny, but I just thought it was funny when I was reading it. Anyways, I would really recommend this if you like Janice Hallett's other books. I think if you like them, you would like this. And also just if you like epistolary novels or you just want to try an epistolary novel if you haven't read one, Janice Hallett is like a good place to start, I feel. Although I haven't read like a lot of them, so I don't know if I know what I'm talking about, but I really like them. Then I read What the River Knows by Isabel Ibañez, which is like a historical fiction mystery with a little bit of romance to it. And it starts off in 19th century Buenos Aires, where our main character is a part of the glittering upper society, and she lives there all year, but her parents don't. Her parents spend like the majority of the year in Egypt away from her, and then one season while they're there, she gets a letter from her uncle saying that her parents are unfortunately dead. And so she decides to go to Egypt to not only find answers about what happened to her parents, but also to find answers about this magical ring that her father sent her right before they died. So this is a book that I got a while ago, and one of the reasons that I got this book is that I am always looking for books that are kind of like The Mummy, the movie, which is one of my favorite movies. I want books with like adventure and archaeology. I love that kind of thing. And when this came out, it was sort of marketed as something similar to that. So I thought, this is going to be perfect for me. Then it took me a while to read, and I had sort of middling expectations again because I'd heard kind of mixed things about this book. Some of you have also told me what you think of it, and not all of you love it. And so I again went into this with sort of middling expectations. I wasn't expecting this to blow me away, and again, I think it was quite helpful for me to not have super high expectations. And I would say that overall, again, when I was reading this, I was really enjoying it, but it's not like a new favorite book. I would say that I'm probably a little bit surprised by how much I ended up enjoying this, even though it's not like the best book I've ever read. There was something about it that I really enjoyed, and I read the whole thing in like 2 sittings. It's not a very difficult book to read, I will say, and it's not that long, but for me, that's usually a pretty good sign. There are a lot of elements to this that I really enjoyed. I like the historical setting, I like the whole vibe of Egypt and that whole thing, and I really like the archaeology bits. And there's some things about the writing that made the setting feel really lush, and I feel like I could really picture it. Although, to be fair, when it comes to settings like these, I feel like I'm a pretty easy customer. I also quite enjoyed the plot in here, actually. There are a lot of twists and turns, and it's a lot of fun, even though sometimes it's a little bit ridiculous. There's a lot of running around and dashing about, but it was just fun. There is also some romance in this book, which you may know I'm not the biggest like romance reader or the biggest romance fan, but I thought it was okay, like it fit the story, and I do feel like this book did a pretty good job of setting up for the next books, and it made me intrigued enough that I do want to read the second book. There are some areas where I feel like this book doesn't do quite as well though, and I think one of those areas is definitely the magic. I feel like the magic in here didn't really make a lot of sense, and that is really saying something coming from me because I'm one of those readers where like magic and stuff doesn't necessarily need to make sense. But in this one, I just didn't really get it, and it just felt sort of underutilized and a little unnecessary in a way. I don't know. I didn't feel like it was done all that well. There are also, even though I enjoyed reading about the characters, some of them are quite stereotypical, and some of them maybe lack a little bit of depth, to be honest. And even though I enjoyed it, I do see that maybe that could have been done a little bit better. There are also some things in the writing that I felt like were really repetitive. But again, I really enjoyed this book. Like, it was fun to read and I had a good time with it. Again, I think it helped me to go into this with sort of middling expectations, and I sort of went into it thinking this is going to be a 3 out of 5 star read, which for me is like a book that I read and enjoyed. It's not a bad rating. It's just like, it's for books that I enjoyed but didn't blow me away. And that is what this is in a way. But like I said, I am intrigued to read the second book, so I do think I'm gonna get it and see where the story takes us. As for the comparison to The Mummy, I don't know if we'll ever have a book that lives up to that. It does have some similarities, but this leans YA and The Mummy like follows adult characters. It doesn't have quite the same magic, but it does have some similar elements, I guess. Moving on, I read some more historical fiction. I read The Way of All Flesh by Ambrose Perry. This is historical fiction mystery, and it's set in 1840s Edinburgh. And we're following this medical student who starts an apprenticeship with this doctor of midwifery. And we're following him and the housemaid in the house of this doctor. And the story is about them and how they get sort of caught up in these mysteries about these women dying all over town. So I have a lot of thoughts about this one actually, because I feel sort of ambivalent about it. There are some things about this book that I really liked, and those things I really, really liked. And then there are some things that didn't work as well for me, unfortunately. First, for the good things, I really, really liked the historical setting of this. Not just Edinburgh, but also all of the stuff that we sort of get to see in this book. I feel like the authors of this did a lot of research into this time period, and there's a lot of stuff about what medical practitioners did in this time. It's set in a time of like scientific and medical discovery, and that is a big part of this book, and I really, really enjoyed that. I also really liked reading about our characters. They may not be the most memorable characters that I've ever read about, but they have some interesting backstories and some interesting personalities, I guess, and I did really like reading about them. I thought they were very interesting. For the not so good stuff though, I think the mystery in here is not only slow going or sort of like weirdly paced, I also think that it is incredibly predictable, like annoyingly so. When I was reading this, I just felt like it was so obvious, and I don't understand how the mystery can be like this bad in a way. Maybe I'm being a little bit harsh, but I just felt like it was not done very well at all. Sometimes the story tries to like throw you off, but it doesn't really do it that well, and it's just, I just thought it was so obvious. I also think that this book feels a little bit unfocused, for lack of a better word, or like it's trying to do too many things. And I don't know, like for the historical stuff, it feels very well researched, but it also feels like the authors really want to put a lot of this stuff into the story. And although I really liked reading about it, sometimes it sort of bogs the story down a little bit and it affects the pacing a little bit. And sometimes I almost feel like because the authors want to tell you about this thing, they're trying to force the relevance of it into the story. And even though I thought it was interesting, I don't know if it really worked that well all of the time. I don't know. That with the mystery, it just didn't quite work for me. And I almost feel like this would have been better if they had just cut out the mystery altogether and just focused on the history part and make it like a character driven history type book and make it about the main character's personal secrets or something. I don't really know, but it just feels like it's trying to do a lot of things and it just affects the reading experience in a way that's not great. There are also some other plot points that I thought wrapped up a little weirdly, maybe. So I don't know about this one. And the thing that makes me feel so divided on it is that the things that I liked, I loved. Like the things that I thought were interesting in this book, I was really, really interested in. But then the stuff that didn't work just really did not work for me. So I don't know, it's like a 3 out of 5 star read for me. I think like the good things that I liked are good enough that I feel like it warrants a 3 out of 5. I feel like the stuff that I liked is like a 4 out of 5, and then the stuff that I didn't like is like a 2 out of 5. So we end up with 3 out of 5 as the rating in a way. I don't know if I'm gonna keep going with the series. I would like to know if any of you have read the other books or this book and what you thought, because I do want to read about the characters, I do want to read about the historical setting, I want to read about all of the science and medical stuff, but if the next books have an equally weak mystery, I will throw the book across the room, and I don't really want to do that. So I don't know if I'll keep going, but yeah. This was just, oh, the good stuff was so good, but the bad stuff was also just, oh, not good at all. Second to last, I read this beautiful book. This is The Haunting Season, Ghostly Tales for Long Winter Nights. And this is a short story collection. It's an anthology, so it has loads of different authors. And the stories in here are like, we have a lot of different kinds of stories. We have some gothic ones, some horror ones, we have some with fantasy elements to them, and I feel like all of them very much fit into Ghostly Tales for Long Winter Nights. Like, that's very much the vibe. It's always hard to review short stories, especially anthologies, because we've got a lot of different writing styles and different authors and different stories, but I would say overall, I ended up really, really enjoying this. It's been a while since I've read any short stories, and I feel like this was the perfect one to pick up right now because I really, really liked it. Usually with collections like these, I'll have some stories that I absolutely loved and some stories that I thought were terrible. Like, that's just how it goes with short stories sometimes. But for this one, actually, the stories are all rated either 3, 4, or 5, which for me are really good ratings. So overall, I enjoyed all of these. I remember all of them, and there wasn't one where I was like, well, I really didn't like that one. Like, I liked all of them. I think my favorite story was the one with something about eels. Yeah, The Eel Singers by Natasha Pulley. I would say that that was my favorite. I really enjoyed it. It was very weird, but I usually really like weird stories, so it kind of makes sense that I like that one. I don't really know what else to say about this book, though. It's so hard to talk about these kinds of books, but for me, this was actually a 4 out of 5 star, which usually when I'm reading short story collections, especially anthologies, it's almost never above a 3 out of 5 because the stories are so mixed. But because I really liked all of these stories, I'm gonna give it a 4. It really made me want to get the other one that's like this. I think it's called The Winter Spirits or something. And then in the fall, we're getting another one, which is called The Witching Hour. And I definitely want to read that one. Then lastly, I read this book. I read We Solve Murders by Richard Osman. This is a mystery novel and it follows 2 characters. One is a retired police officer who is living in this little village, and he is very into his peaceful life and his routine and his cat, and he just doesn't want to leave his life at all. And then we're following him and his daughter-in-law, who is a private security officer who's kind of like an adrenaline junkie and who is on a job protecting this world famous author, and that job turns deadly. Longtime viewers of this channel will know that the Thursday Murder Club series is one of my favorite series. I absolutely love those books, and I was really excited about this one because I like that this author is writing something different as well. I like when authors they don't just keep going with what everybody loves, but they try different things as well. I was really excited about this, but I don't know if I ever really expressed that I was actually really nervous about this book as well, because I loved those other books so much. I just was really scared that this wasn't gonna work for me and that was like a one-time thing, and it made me sort of apprehensive to read it because I was just really nervous that I wasn't gonna like it. Turns out I had nothing to worry about. I loved this. Honestly, more than I thought I would, even in like the best case scenario. There's something about the way this author writes and like the narrative style that just works so well for me. And when I read his books, I'm just having the time of my life. I loved meeting the characters in here. I was very curious about this father-in-law, daughter-in-law dynamic and relationship, but I really liked reading about it and I felt like it really worked, at least for me. We also have more characters joining this sort of mystery solving adventure that they end up on, and I really liked reading about all of them. I also thought that the mystery was done really well in here. There are some twists and turns, and sometimes it's a little bit ridiculous and over the top, but for some reason, in these books, it just really works for me. I think the way this author writes is just very charming, and I like how there's all of this fun stuff going on. There's action and there's mystery, but also sometimes the story will take a turn. It will like pull on your heartstrings a little bit. I also just really like the way he writes characters, especially elderly characters. Like there's something about that just works really well, and yeah, these books are just so much fun. I think that Thursday Murder Club will always have a special place in my heart, but I gotta say, I think maybe I enjoyed this as much as I liked the first book in the Thursday Murder Club series. I don't know if it's just because this is a more recent read, so it's fresher in mind, but like, I ended up really, really loving this. I also just think it's cool that this author is writing something else, and I'm really looking forward to more books coming out on this series. I do think that the next book this author has coming out is another book in the Thursday Murder Club series. I don't really know, but I really hope he goes back to this as well because I want more of this too. It kind of seems like this author can do no wrong for me. I don't know what it is, but I just love it. Now, as you know, I am the stingiest beast when it comes to 5-star ratings. I don't know what it is. I have such a hard time handing them out. And actually, the Thursday Murder Club got 4 stars from me. Like, all of those books have gotten 4 stars. I haven't given 5 stars to any of them. I'm wondering if I should go back and give at least the first one 5 stars and then also give this 5 stars. I don't really know, but it feels wrong to give this 5 and not one of those 5, if that makes sense. But yeah, I really, really like these books. I know they're not for everyone. Like, some people just really don't get on with them, but I just absolutely love them. And I can't get enough. I wish I could read like 10 of these a year. I would really recommend this, although I think that if you didn't like the Thursday Murder Club, you probably won't like this. It depends a little bit of why you didn't like it, but like the narrative style is very similar, like the writing is very similar, and the tone of it and the humor of it is like kind of the same. So I feel like if you liked the Thursday Murder Club, you would like this, but I know that not everyone does. So yeah, I don't know, but I am loving all of this and I can't get enough. That was the last book though, and like I said, I feel like I had a really good reading month. I got to a lot of really good books. I enjoyed reading a lot, like all I wanted to do was read, and I feel like I did read a lot, and I'm very happy with it. Now, I would love to know what you read in January, if you liked it, if you didn't. I would also love to know if you have read any of the books that I mentioned, if you liked them or you didn't. Tell me all about it in the comments, and that was kind of it for today. As always, thank you very much for hanging out with me today, and I will see you soon. Bye!